At age 9, I flew by myself to Colorado to attend summer camp. My eyes searched the dark night sky out the window of the van, landing on bright stars and outlines of mountain peaks. After bumping down a dirt road, the headlights shone onto the wrought iron archway announcing Blue Mountain Ranch. After carrying my truck into Angel's Rest, the youngest girl's cabin, my counselor patted me on the head and said, "Welcome to camp, Jessica Rabbit." A handful of girls already tucked into their bunk beds giggled. A brunette with bright blue eyes gestured for me to take the empty bunk bed under hers. She dangled her hair off the side and said, "I'm Margaret." Margaret showed me the ropes in this special place where everyone seemed to fit in. We posed our stuffed animals in the trees behind our cabin for photo shoots. I'd never had a real best friend before. The 2-week term flew by. I cried for days after arriving home, feeling lonesome for that bubble up in the Rockies where I felt whole. It wasn't that I had a difficult childhood. I was the oldest of 4 kids in a prominent Dallas family and struggled to navigate the social hierarchies that accompanied this. I cherished moments separate from the chaos of my household, where I could see who I was outside of it. The mountain air near Pikes Peak emboldened me to embrace my sassy redhead self. I'd never felt so me before. Camp became my annual refuge. In middle school, the angst of not fitting in came to a boil. I judged appearances to be way more important than smarts or talent. I yearned to be tan, blonde, and thin. I committed to the one of those things that I could control. The restrictions started with limiting dessert to once a week. Then it became a game to see how little I could eat. After fainting on my way to PE class, my French teacher called home. That night, my mom sat me down at the wooden table in our kitchen with a steaming plate of pasta. She looked at me hard. "You will eat to prove to me that you can snap out of this, or I will send you away and let the professionals make you do it." She sat back with her arms crossed across her chest. I was terrified of disappointing her. So I took a deep breath and began to eat. But all I wanted was her to ask me why I was starving myself. I entered high school with a new sense of defiance, which I carefully hid under perfect grades and 3 meals a day. I tasted alcohol for the first time with a male friend. After a gulp of vodka that buckled my knees, his pudgy face was ripe for kissing. Margaret and I got on the phone the week before camp started. "Finally, we're going to be in Clark Hall, the oldest and coolest girls' cabin," I exclaimed. "We should bring some booze for the last night, go out strong." "Oh, no problem," I said. "My parents don't even lock their liquor cabinet." "I'll bring some too. It's going to be the best summer ever." After packing my trunk with toiletries, stationery, and cowboy boots, I tucked a small Evian bottle filled with vodka into my sleeping bag. My insides sizzled with gleeful excitement. I'd always looked up to the older girls at camp, and now I was going to be one. A week into the month-long term, our counselor announced we'd be going on our annual camp out. Margaret said, "Hey, let's bring the alcohol. You brought it, right?" I flinched. Yeah, didn't you?" "No, I wasn't able to, but I've got some cigarettes." This wasn't the deal. Waiting till the last night involved minimal risk. A terrible desire for self-destruction flooded my body. It felt remarkably similar to the triumph I'd felt when starving myself. What the hell? I dug out the Evian and took a swig. After a campfire dinner, Margaret, me, and a couple of other girls gathered our sleeping bags under a cool nest of trees. We passed around the bottle, laughing and telling stories. We probably drank less than a shot each, but in our nubile bodies, it sent a shiver of looseness that felt wonderfully reckless. I finally felt like the cool girl I'd always longed to be. The next morning, my counselor told me I needed to go see Susie, the camp director. Oh, no, I thought. She grasped my hands and said, "Nicole, I'm so sorry. I didn't have a choice." Had someone told on me? Why? What's going to happen now? I steeled my insides and headed down the hill to Susie's office. Her face was red and puffy, and she had the camp contract laid out in front of her. "Nicole, it breaks my heart to say this, but I'm going to have to send you home. We have a zero-tolerance policy for alcohol. I called your parents. Your flight is in the morning." All the air sucked out of the room, my head spinning. I knew the entire camp would be shocked at my dismissal. Wanting the truth to be my legacy, I asked, "Could I at least tell the campers what I've done?" "Sure," she said. "I'll call them to Beaver Lodge after lunch." As I walked up the hill, all the blood ran out of my body. I vowed not a bite of food would cross my lips until I'd punished myself for betraying the place I'd been such a happy camper. A cabin mate confessed that she'd ratted me out. Margaret, horrified and full of regret, turned herself in, but bringing cigarettes wasn't bad enough to get her sent home. I sat stiffly through lunch, wanting to disappear. I felt like a zombie as I stood and shared my story with the shocked campers who, until then, had admired me. When the camp nurse called me to her office, I thought she wanted to check in with me emotionally. Instead, she screamed at me. "Do you know you could have killed someone? What if one of those girls was on medication?" After a sleepless night, a favorite male counselor drove me to the airport. He delved into detail about his history with alcohol. I wanted to scream, "It's not an addiction for me!" But my anger choked me into silence. The stunned look on my parents' faces when they picked me up at the airport drove a stake into my heart. They waited while I underwent a 3-hour psychiatric evaluation. Feelings of insecurity, shame, and regret poured out of me. The shrink informed my parents, "Your daughter is not an alcoholic. She's anorexic." The dark presence of anorexia became a slow form of suicide. It took months of outpatient treatment and a 3-week break from school to finally release its hold on me. Once the behaviors diminished, I could see that rather than trying to be someone else, I needed to learn to love myself. 4 years later, Susie invited me to return to Blue Mountain Ranch as a counselor. The pain of disappointing myself and the people I love lingered. The illusion of being cool vanished. But being forgiven before I had the courage to forgive myself was a gift. A few years ago, I took my then boyfriend to a camp reunion where we slept in bunk beds in Clark Hall. I showed him where Margaret and I had scrawled our names on the ceiling. I was ashamed to confess what had happened there, but his compassion was a final piece in forgiving myself. The next year, Susie attended our wedding, no one smiling bigger than her at my happiness. I consider myself a recovering perfectionist. Failing still hurts, but internalizing my pain and anger is far worse than facing the fact that I'm human with strengths and weaknesses. I may not always do the right thing, but I'm finally okay with that.